Massively oversimplifying and will explain. I think we can blame it all on Apple. What we've had more recently is that outside technology and timeframes,
Yeah.
more importantly, the timeframes have started impinging on automotive. So that started with the mobile phone and other consumer devices, but that really accelerated with the smartphone when the car suddenly was marching to someone else's time frame in a way. We had all this innovation happening on this personal device, including some very automotive-centric apps like navigation, which was completely out of step with traditional automotive industry timescales.
How are you today?
Very good, thanks. Nice to see you as always, Junko.
Yeah,
So pleasure to be here.
it's so I'm here with Ian Riches. He's a vice president, global automotive practice at TechInsights. I've known Ian for a long time,
Hmm.
probably not as 30 years,
Maybe not
but
30 years.
yeah. But the topic of this conversation is that it came to my attention. Ian happens to be celebrating his 30th year of working as an analyst
Indeed.
covering automotive electronics, right? And I said to myself, this is the perfect opportunity to look back, not only what automotive industry has gone through, but also what Ian has observed for the
Hmm.
last 30 years. And especially, I've been a reporter myself that we are lucky to have the kind of front row seat when things are happening, unfolding in front of our eyes. I have no idea. How does one become an analyst? How did you become an analyst to start with, Ian?
For me, slightly by accident, in one sense. For reasons I can't explain, I've always loved cars. So my parents joke that when most kids would start off pointing, saying cat, dog, ours going Ford, Volkswagen, etc.
Really? Oh,
So
wow.
it's always been something there for me. And so at school, I loved maths and science, and so I did an engineering degree and studied things like turbo machinery, fluid dynamics, and internal combustion engines. And the aim was to get a job as an engineer in the automotive industry.
Wow.
Um, for some reason, that never happened.
Yeah.
Partially, I met an absolutely wonderful woman at university who's still my wife of over 30 years, and she found a
Oh,
job before me, and that kind of narrowed my geographic search for a job. Also, I graduated in a minor recession of 1992, I think it was, for
ooh.
the auto industry, and so there weren't quite as many jobs around, and I just kept failing at the last hurdle. And then I saw this job advertised by the Institute of Mechanical Engineers in the
Yeah.
UK
Yeah.
as an assistant editor on Automotive Engineer, their publication for all their automotive members. And I thought, well, I can vaguely write as well. I'll apply for that. So I
Yeah.
applied for that and I got that. So I
Wow.
never actually became an engineer, but I started initially in trade journalism, and from that via one or two other things. When I saw an advert for an automotive analyst, I thought that sounds like what I'm doing, potentially even more fun. And as I said, that was in spring 1996
Wow.
when I answered that advert. And essentially, despite some different changes of ownership and different names of companies I've been working under, I've been doing the same job ever since for the last 30 years.
Lucky you. I mean, few people can actually say that, right? I mean, but this is a topic that's something you deeply care about, and but also this is the industry which has gone through a lot of changes.
A lot of
For
change.
yeah, as an analyst, this is really the perfect topic, I think. And
Yeah.
when you and I talked about this last week, you beginning to tell me that. Over the last 30 years, you have found more disruptions in the last 15 years. Is that right?
I'd say so. Yes, there's a mixture. So some of those have been technological, structural, but also just external events. The fact that we live in rather uncertain times at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, I've been having a think about this, and I think,
Yeah.
and I'm massively oversimplifying and will explain. I think we can blame it all on Apple.
Oh, that's a new one, Ian. Tell me more.
I think automotive has obviously, developed a lot of technology, also brought in a lot of technology from elsewhere. And I've done automotive electronics, semiconductors. Automotive didn't invent semiconductors, but it's made great use of them. But for many years, the implementation of technologies invented elsewhere was effectively done on automotive's own timescales. It got to control how and when it used it, et cetera, et cetera. What we've had more recently is that outside technology and timeframes,
Yeah.
more importantly, the timeframes have started impinging on automotive. So that started with the mobile phone and other consumer devices, because back then we had PDAs, we had portable navigation units, we had a whole plethora of different own personal devices. But that
Right.
really accelerated with the smartphone when the car suddenly was marching to someone else's time frame in a way. We had all this innovation happening on this personal device, including some
Right.
very automotive centric apps like navigation, which was completely out of step with traditional automotive industry timescales. And that's being arguably turbocharged even more with AI, which again, the automotive industry is using, but is absolutely not in control of.
That's
Uh,
fascinating. But I think that's a very controversial comment you made because I don't think any automakers, I'm talking about these are the too big to fail automakers,
yeah,
for example, like the big three in America. And, they had never thought about how their business would be affected by the outside forces, including a totally different industry that you're
yeah.
talking about.
And that's the tension that I've seen in these disruptions, and it's dissipated over the years, but my perception, there's always been a very strong not invented here syndrome in automotive and the desire to reinvent, reinterpret. Um, and so maybe that's one reason, I'm even older than Ethernet. Ethernet's been around a long time, but it's taken, despite in many senses it being ideal and it being recognized as that today, it's taken a long time to come into automotive, and we've gone through all sorts of iterations of,
Yeah,
essentially automotive only protocols and moving data around the vehicle, some of which have been very successful, lasted a very long time. But now
right,
we're finally, I say after 50 odd years, saying, yeah, actually, this Ethernet stuff's quite good, isn't it?
right.
And
Yeah.
just another example of that, again, it goes back to the very early days. In 1998, I was sat in a hotel room in Dearborn when the Automotive Multimedia Interface Consortium was started up, and it had a whole load of big name OEMs and tier ones, and every on paper it was perfect, and it was to solve the problem of connecting all these personal devices to the vehicle, create a sort of
Oh,
standardized interface.
right,
And yes, and Bluetooth became part of that as one of the things, that it was more about some of the software, the middleware, and things like that.
right.
And essentially, again, it failed because the automotive industry was too slow, that it was too complex, and what was designed in one sense to sort of keep the auto industry in control never worked. And now that interface is largely defined again by Google and Apple.
Interesting. But to the automakers' defense, I would say I could hear automakers telling us that well, that those smartphone makers or whatever the PC companies or whatever that they don't really understand automotive.
And
Automotive,
and and
yeah,
that's always been the challenge in automotive, that
yeah,
they look at a technology elsewhere and they think, yeah, that's 90% perfect, but we just need to tweak this because they don't really understand us.
yeah,
And
exactly.
that's something I've seen again and again over the years, particularly again when I've talked to lots and helped lots and lots of startups over the year trying to get into automotive.
Yeah.
For someone outside of automotive, they underestimate how special automotive is. For someone inside automotive,
Right.
they overestimate how special
Oh,
automotive
I
is.
see. That's
And so
the
the and
tension.
so the tension. So that's the truth. So a startup will say we have this brilliant idea. Yes, it might not align perfectly in every bit. We're sure we can overcome that. And of course they never do.
Right.
Like I mean, the automotive say, well, this 2% difference on the spec sheet is a complete game deal breaker. We can't possibly make this work.
Ah,
Whereas perhaps in another part of the world or a car company with a different idea can
ah.
just say, actually, you know what? Linux in a vehicle, that's going to be fine. We'll make that work. Um,
Yeah. No, that's true. That it used to be that it has to be the special RTOS, real-time operating system that should be in the car, and nobody would dare dream of putting Linux in,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
And Tesla found a different way of doing things.
yeah. Wow, this is pretty exciting. So, can you give me examples of companies who failed by underestimating the difficulties of automotive specialties, while automakers who overestimated the
Oh,
special thing about themselves? Any technology examples we can talk about? We don't have to talk about the companies
that's a
that failed, but is
that's a
there? Yeah.
a really interesting one. I've seen there's a lot of technologies out there which have been around for a long time, which haven't made it in automotive for various reasons. Um, and various aspects of the automotive situation, I think, have caused that. So one would be dedicated night vision sensors, still a very low penetration rate solution.
Yep.
Um, Again, I think a lot of the vendors there, even though on paper they offer, and even in practice, a great improvement, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah,
they perhaps fail to understand that so many car companies are still very cost driven, very good
that's
reasons
true.
because they have to make a profit, and it's just being better isn't good enough. You have
No,
to be
that's
better.
so
You
true.
you have
Yeah,
to add enough value that someone's actually going to pay for it.
yeah,
And so, unless again, it's still in my models that until or unless there's a NHTSA or a Euro NCAP or whatever standard which effectively mandates a night vision sensor, which we're starting to get closer and closer to with some of the later protocols and things, then
mhm,
it's going to be a very hard sell to go onto the car.
yeah,
Um, Another very, very different example would be hydrogen. Again, I've been going to what things look like. What used to be the Frankfurt Motor Show is no longer for 30 odd years. And pretty much every single time I've gone, there's been some form of hydrogen powered vehicle, whether it's in the early days, the likes of BMW and I think Mercedes as well, using actually hydrogen powered internal combustion engines. And then there, over many, many times, various iterations of the fuel cell vehicle. So remember companies like Ballard and all this sort of thing. And the Mercedes. I mean, the A class was meant to be the original A class was largely if you look at the structure of it, largely meant to be an EV or a hydrogen powered vehicle
right,
with fuel cells.
right.
Um, and again, just underestimate the infrastructure challenges perhaps in automotive, that it's not just, we've
That's
the fuel cell works great. If we had a network selling hydrogen where every 2 or 3 miles there was somewhere you could pull in and refill with hydrogen, I think we would have plenty more hydrogen fuel cell vehicles because
yeah,
the technology's there, it works, etc., etc. But it's
yeah,
these structural problems and things as well that we've never actually seen it break through
right.
into anything resembling a mass market solution. And
No,
as battery technology improves all the time, that sort of window is arguably getting narrower. There was an argument that maybe for fleet vehicles, heavy trucks, hydrogen could be the way forward, and maybe it still is.
yeah,
But again, as we see more and different battery technologies, much higher densities of energy storage, much higher recharge rates, that
yeah.
potential advantage of hydrogen starts getting slimmer because it's always easier to bring electricity to a place than it is to bring hydrogen.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Okay, so these are the examples of whether it's a startup or technology companies outside the automotive industry trying to sell the advancement of their
Yeah,
technology into the auto, right? What about the other way around? What are the things that automakers totally miss?
I think
Yeah,
I think a lot of automakers, and probably myself included, actually missed what I now see as Tesla's, certainly in the early days, special sauce and what made Tesla so unusual. Because many people have tried to start a car company, and pretty much everyone except Mr. Musk has failed.
yeah, yeah,
Going back, I mean, I'm a child of the 70s, DeLorean, growing up in the UK, that was
All
a big
right.
thing. For those of you, if that's news to you, look it up. It's a great story, um, with all sorts of intrigue and illegality. But anyway, um,
Yeah, in America, there's a Tucker, right? I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
it's similar.
yeah,
Earlier still, that was
yeah,
40s and 50s, I think, wasn't it, rather than 70s? So
yeah,
yes, this sort of idea. So I start, um, it was usually the joke. What's the best way to make a small fortune? In start with a large fortune and make a car company.
yeah, yeah.
Then you end up with a small fortune because you're going to lose money.
No, that's
Um,
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
but a lot initially in the early days was Tesla was an electric car company, absolutely, and it found a niche there. But fundamentally, Tesla, I think, was a an holistic car company.
mm,
And so much of the automotive industry was, and to a degree still is, so deeply siloed that
yeah,
maybe aside from aspects of the brand, but there wasn't a vision, an overall vision of the car. No man or woman within the organization had
yeah,
the strength of vision that Elon Musk had as to what the car could be. So that the whole kicking off of this centralized architecture revolution, the use of, Ethernet, Linux,
yep,
all these sort of foundational technologies, as it were, brought from outside.
yeah,
And that actually potentially being far more the secret sauce of Tesla than necessarily the electric vehicle or the automated vehicle side of things. They were enablers of that. But
yeah,
it was this vision that actually that the car is a product that someone needs to own in its entirety almost, rather
yeah,
than an amalgamation of a powertrain and a chassis and an infotainment system, which all had separate visions and in some cases competing and made doing some things very difficult because you had to get Department A in this city to talk to Department B in that city in different time zones with different cultures and ethoses and all this sort of thing.
yeah,
So yeah, that's something that I think that a lot of the mainstream auto industry missed the importance of. And we've seen some of their responses sometimes in terms of setting up software divisions or large engineering teams almost doubling down on that failure by going so big and that they were we said earlier too big to fail, they were too big to succeed because
yeah,
again it was complexity,
yeah. You know,
whereas actually what a lot of Tesla are about was simplification.
yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think over and over, what we have been seeing in the recent years is that automakers, because they have a long history and they have a long experience of how things need to get done within an organization, that's yeah, I think you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it really is sort of like the departments are so
Yeah,
siloed, specialized,
yeah,
and that worked at some, at earlier
yeah.
time, but that this really became the albatross around their neck, right?
It made the as increasingly it was the cross domain innovation where things were happening.
Yeah,
Features weren't being created at that sort of individual domain or product level anymore. Features were being created by combining compute and sensing inputs and actuation across all of those different areas.
yeah,
And so if you couldn't do that or couldn't do
yeah,
that effectively at scale and at speed, you were at a
right.
massive competitive disadvantage.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So, do you think that the current, modern days automakers have overcome that challenge, or are we still, struggling with that? You know,
I think we're still working through it, to be honest
yeah,
with you, in many cases. As I say, we now know a lot more things that don't work.
yeah,
So just simply throwing money and engineers at the problem doesn't work. And in some senses, you could argue makes it worse. Tesla has a much smaller engineering team, and many of the Chinese automakers, again, have much smaller engineering teams than
yeah,
many of the others. They have
yeah,
learned conventional car companies have understood and worked on a lot. I mean, some of the changes I've seen over my 30 years, when I started 30 years ago, in general, the semiconductor vendors normally worked through a tier one and didn't spend a lot of time talking to car makers and didn't spend a lot of their marketing budget, sales budget, as it were, directly talking to car makers because their customers were the tier ones.
Right.
Nowadays, that's a very different relationships, and actually, it's a different challenge if you're a tier one, because increasingly, in many cases, you're sometimes getting bypassed or, seeing
Sure.
your value add eroded. But that change in relationship is both ways, as maybe, and if I'm being provocative, frustrated semiconductor companies started to looking to bypass tier ones that they saw as a roadblock to innovation.
Right.
Provocative statement, not
Yeah,
true in
no,
some
but that's true.
circumstances, but it has an
That's
element of truth about it.
yeah,
And then car makers, again, looking for an acceleration in innovation, realizing they needed to go direct to the silicon vendors to get up to speed on what was happening. That's been another massive relationship shift
yeah,
over the last 30 years. And within that, just again, the rise of the importance of software and software at every point in the value chain and how people are looking to extract value from that. I remember many years ago talking to one of the key, deeply embedded automotive to its core semiconductor vendors. Will software ever be a product? No, that's for our customers. It was never. Nowadays, like any, that they have ecosystems, they have product, because they've had to. But
yeah,
back then it was no, we wouldn't tread on our customers' toes. We just designed the chips, maybe a few tool sets here or there or what have you. And now, software value add and every part of the value chain, and that's really where most people might, see the value being added in the
yeah,
future.
yeah. No, that's very true. Speaking of which, though, um, I think you mentioned that throwing more software engineers at the automakers does not necessarily advance the software engineering forces, right? So what should they do? I mean, we've seen so many stories about actually it's not just the automakers, chip companies as well. As we interviewed all these companies, they always brag about they have more software engineers than hardware engineers. I
Engineers.
mean, that seems to
Yeah.
be the trend, right?
Yeah.
So tell
That's
me about your take on how to improve software. It's not necessarily contingent upon the number of software engineers.
yeah. No. It I'm not a software engineer myself, so I sit
Yeah,
outside it. So
yeah,
there we go. I think there's a lot that comes down to really defining and understanding the problem and therefore the resources required, rather than just throwing, it's not a perfect analogy, but with certain problems, there are certain roadblocks which you can't overcome with more resource.
yeah,
So a human adult female takes 9 months to grow a baby.
yeah.
If you throw 9 women at the problem, you don't get it in 1 month.
There you go. No, that's true.
It's a slightly facile example, but it's certainly this under. Well, actually, what are we trying to do here? What are these key metrics? And then that short feedback loop again, where some of the challenger OEMs have been better is okay, getting something out there
Yeah,
which doesn't kill people. Is safe, but perhaps isn't necessarily complete,
yeah,
and then rapidly iterating on that, which has required all sorts of other technologies, the OTAs, et cetera, which again, if you didn't have a simplified vehicle network, if you still had 200 individual ECUs, was a much larger process. So it's all come together,
yeah.
but being able to iterate on this software, get feedback, rapidly improve,
Right.
um, and then accelerate your lead in many cases,
Yeah.
because you've got the data from the vehicle. Everyone's getting there now with doing this, but you had this virtuous feedback loop of being able to push features out in the market, gather data on those features, improve those features, push
Yeah.
out updates.
Yeah, yeah, that's no, that's true. But then again, there is a tension, right? I mean, we're talking about the traditional way, automotive way of se what do you call it? Assuring safety
Yeah,
is not.
mhm,
It's different from developing software or smartphones because smartphones, you do the software updates.
exactly.
Maybe there's
It's
some
you're right, and
right.
and
Yeah,
I'm glad that we have all those deeply embedded safety people in automotive, and that on the whole, the product is still incredibly safe given its complexity.
yeah,
and I'm so grateful for that because it would be terrible if we lost that.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, as with always, there's two sides to a coin, and I think overly conservative is a valid criticism in some cases.
Yeah. All right. I have a couple more questions. I think when we talked before, I think you started talking about the bifurcation of the industry. Tell me a little bit
Yes,
more about that.
that's a fascinating one.
Yeah.
When I look across other industries, I tend to see very few large successful players who are both innovators in IP and manufacturing.
Mm,
By and large, you have companies which are very, companies have changed their strategies and their emphases over the years, like an IBM or what have you.
sure.
Um, but they tend to specialize in one or the other.
Mm,
And I see that starting to happen in the automotive industry. Perhaps even in the tier one base. So if you look at the history of Aptiv or Delphi Delco as it was, there was a split up there when Aptiv was formed. There's been another split just happening now. I think even 1st of April is when it goes. Where is it? Versagent with like the EDS wiring harness type business gets split off from Aptiv, and Aptiv becomes even more perhaps pure play sort of ADAS zonal controllery software defined vehicle sort of thing. So there's this sort of separation of value.
yep.
And I've been fascinated by what Foxconn is doing. Um,
Mm,
so the rise of the possibility of these sort of skateboard type platforms and effectively having a white label vehicle.
yeah.
And there being a manufacturer who you can go to and say, look, I need a two-seater sports car of around 200 kilowatt, whatever, and then being able to bring your brand to that through the software and the styling and things, express that brand in
Right.
some way, luxury, sport, youthful, whatever your brand alignment happens to be. But
Yeah.
actually yourself just be a brand expert
Yeah.
potentially, and maybe have some unique IP you're bringing. You could imagine if it happened that way, and Apple would have some unique IP it could bring to a vehicle. There are other technology companies that could do that if they so choose,
Right.
but not actually getting involved in the dirty business of making the thing.
I see.
And
Wow.
likewise, if I look at China today,
Yeah.
in some respects, related to the automotive industry, it looks perhaps a little bit like Britain did in the 1950s and 1960s. Lots and lots and lots and lots of brands,
Hmm.
too many.
Yes.
So I think one certainty as the 2020s go into the 2030s is we're going to have to see some form of consolidation in China because there are too many car companies making too few cars. There's overcapacity.
Yeah.
And again, some may succeed as technology-led brands.
Yes.
Others may potentially choose to, we've got a factory, we're great at making this stuff, but to be honest with you, maybe we're not the best at
Yeah.
innovating.
Yeah.
Can we actually innovate in manufacturing?
Yeah.
And become a low-cost manufacturing base or a highly efficient. I think that we're probably past the days ever of truly low cost because of the complexity of the product, if you know what I mean, but a highly efficient manufacturing base for these type of products and bring our innovation into that manufacturing process rather
I
than actually
see.
into the technology on the vehicle.
Wow. That's I think that's the kind of thing that automakers don't want to hear, right? I mean, you
It's
either depend on a white box car company, but how do you build the brand? But
how do
speaking
you
of,
build the
yeah,
it's a really difficult one, especially because as I say, I've always loved cars. I always had a soft spot for Italian brands, and the town I live in now actually has a very high Italian heritage population for
okay,
various reasons,
yeah,
which is great. So I see, perhaps a disproportionate number of older Fiats and Alfa Romeos and driving
geez.
around. Um, but yes, I mean, some of those brands, like my heart bleeds for Lancia.
Yeah.
In my youth, one of the most exciting cars I got to drive a Lancia Delta Integrale. And these sort of products. And you're right. There's a lot of heritage which is perhaps withering. But again, I'm a Brit. I look back to our own history, and we plenty of British brands have died over the years, and plenty more. British-centric brands are trying to reinvent themselves at the moment. Thinking of JLR, and I wish them all the
Yeah.
success, but it's not going to be easy.
No,
Um,
that's true. Yeah,
so
no,
you're right. It is what brand means
exactly.
at this
It's
time when so much is defined by the software, when
yeah.
you're not necessarily bringing direct innovations yourselves in terms of the hardware.
It's it's difficult.
Um,
Yeah. And speaking of which, I'd like to bring back on the subject of semiconductors, automotive
mhm,
semiconductors. And when we talk about IP, on one hand, there's technology IP, on the other hand, manufacturing IP. But the focus on the manufacturing, I think we need to talk about the platform that chip companies are bringing to the automotive
mhm.
industry, whether it's NVIDIA, Qualcomm, or Mobileye. How do you actually expect these chip companies to either overrule the automakers, or what's going to happen, Ian?
It's fascinating. As I say, I think a lot of brand identity increasingly is getting caught up in the fine tuning of that software.
Yeah.
So Professor Shashir at Mobilize talked a lot about that at previous events in terms of although their solution is still relatively closed box, black box, whatever you want to call it, exposing all those various tuning parameters.
Yeah.
So, how fast a vehicle accelerates as standard to reach a certain speed, how aggressive it is in certain maneuvers, all these sorts of things. So there's that tuning. So in the software domain, whereas beforehand, you could perhaps differentiate a Jaguar on the quality of its ride going
Mm,
back decades. The chassis tuning. It'll be maybe the software tuning now, which differentiates certain brands, even if they're based on a relatively common hardware or software platform. It's how you express the brand through those
yeah.
individual parameters. And we even see that in gearboxes today, that the fine tuning. I mean, the ubiquitous ZF8 speed behaves
Oh,
actually quite differently in different cars
wow.
because of the individual
It's-
OEM tuning. And sometimes it's more refined than others. It's obviously spent more time and money getting it right. So that again, that ZF8 speed is in so many cars that the
yeah.
experience isn't unique in all of them
Yeah.
because of the way it's been integrated. So it's that integration of technology.
Geez.
And then also for the car makers, for those, a number are still going heavily down the vertically integrated route, looking at the likes of Tesla, BYD, making a lot, so they're sort of staying outside of that ecosystem.
Right.
We'll have long term, we'll have to see how that plays out for them. But even within that, we're seeing, some plays of carving out unique solutions for different markets in different areas, with different partners, and actually keep, what's the essence that we perhaps need to keep a little bit of uniqueness on, in
Mm,
this area, and where we can throw a bit of our own R&D money, our expertise, and this is where we spend our money because we think this is core to the brand, as it were, and that'll be different for different companies.
yeah. All right. I'm gonna throw the monkey wrench here in our conversation. The
Sounds fun.
I'm all these things we just talked about is like if um based on what automakers can produce to offer to the consumers, right?
Hmm.
Do most automakers need to have a autonomous vehicle play? In other words, that the autonomous vehicle is not about tuning. It's not about, it's more of a transportation operation.
Operation.
And
Yeah.
why companies like Volkswagen is so intent on becoming the AV leader in Europe, for example.
I Autonomous is one of those things which, as you say, you can potentially ignore until a certain point, and I think at which point it becomes, why did I ever think about ignoring this? And you're suddenly lost, because I think the changeover could be quite rapid
Yeah.
at a certain point. So we might have a real hockey stick on this,
Yeah.
certainly in developed economies.
Yeah.
You're right. If you were a farrier, a blacksmith, back in the days of the horse, what did you have to fear from the car? It was coming, and then suddenly everything switches,
Right.
and the horse goes from mainstream industrialized technology to a hobby.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Um, and when you say about the tuning, actually, when mobility becomes primarily a service rather than an ownership proposition, and we're looking slightly further ahead, then things start looking very different again.
Yeah.
Most people, and I appreciate there are some who have very strong opinions, most people don't choose their flight on whether it's an Airbus or a Boeing.
Oh,
They
that's
don't.
true.
They choose on the amount of legroom available, the quality of the food on board, the scheduling, the
That's
price.
true.
So when mobility is offered as a service, as it were, it's the brand on that service rather than the nameplate on the piece of hardware and software that happens to be delivering the service.
Yeah. But air
Uh,
pilots do choose. I mean, well, they don't
and
really,
I know
but they
that
say,
there are some who have strong opinions on Airbus
yeah,
versus Boeing,
yeah,
but for the bulk of consumers,
yeah, that's right.
it's an aeroplane.
Yeah,
And they may prefer one, but they don't necessarily prefer one that might be due to cabin layout or noise level. Again, it's largely about the service. So
yeah,
if we get to a point where automated driving is ubiquitous and we've moved to a point where actually I'm not necessarily owning this vehicle anymore.
right.
I might not even have one which is assigned to me. It might just be if I live in an urban area, it might just be purely on demand.
Yeah. It, yeah,
Like many people use taxis today, many people, urban dwellers actually don't own vehicles
yeah,
already,
yeah,
and it's automating it. Then it becomes about the quality of the service.
yeah. And we don't
Uh,
choose a particular model for the
no,
taxi.
that's it. Whenever I order an Uber, I don't have a
Yeah,
filter list which says actually, I'm only interested in these brands.
yeah,
You just take whatever car comes up.
exactly.
So and yes, it's a drive. You have a rating for the driver. You don't have a rating for the brand of car. Um, but
Yeah,
it
that's
becomes
right. Yeah.
actually it's a very different conversation that we've been having about technology because we've moved from the out of the realms of product into the realms of service,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
And so that's why I think that could be a tipping point because it gives time back to people.
yeah,
And time is something which most people in this world are
right.
short of. Now, again, with AI, who knows? We may all
Yeah,
be out of jobs, and we may have universal basic income everywhere, and where we place income tax on robots and AI algorithms rather than humans. That's a different question. We could be
yeah,
going somewhere else, but assuming that time is still a an important and valuable
yeah,
commodity for a human
yeah.
not having to perform that driving task yourself and be able to do other things and
It's
become either economically active or socially
yeah, yeah,
creative in that time
yeah.
is a huge thing.
Yeah, and that is really the revolution this industry has gone through. I mean, it really changed the perspective which business you are in, right?
Yeah,
It's yeah, yeah. It couldn't be clearer than that. All right. Very good. So, anything else you'd like to add? Yeah.
I don't think so at the end, other than just to say it's been a delight as always talking with you.
Yeah.
If any of your listeners readers violently disagree with anything I've said, that sounds fantastic. I always love a good debate, so do pass those on
Yeah.
and
We'll do
enter the
part two,
comments
yeah,
and everything,
then.
etc. But that's
Yeah.
it. So and we can take this debate forward. But no, at 30 years, not planning on stopping just yet. Life's way too interesting.
There you go. I totally agree with you. All right. Very good. Well, thanks for coming to the show, and we'll do it again.
Lovely.
All
Thank you
right.
very much, Jennifer. Bye.
Bye.